May I invite the witnesses to come forward to the witness table? Good morning. For the record, please state your names and the positions that you hold in your organization.
My name is Carol Soon Wang. I'm a senior research fellow from the Institute of Policy Studies. I'm here making a submission in my personal capacity today.
My name is Shawn Song, and I'm a research assistant at the Institute of Policy Studies, but I'm making the representation today in my personal capacity.
Okay. The evidence you'll be giving today before the committee will be taken on oath. So if you desire, you can also take an affirmation. The clerk, please administer the oath.
I, Shawn Song, do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence which I shall give before this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Witnesses, please be seated. Welcome to the public hearing of the Select Committee on Deliberate Online Falsehoods. The focus of today's evidence gathering session is for us to put questions to you, and you have taken a solemn obligation to answer our questions truthfully. I will now call on Minister Shanmugam, who has indicated that he would like to question the witnesses, and following that, Mr. Seah Kian Peng. Mr. Shanmugam.
Thank you, and good morning, Dr. Soon and Mr. Goh. Your research area includes issues relating to new media and its impact, right? And thank you for your written representation made to the Select Committee. You have also published a report, a very detailed report in June 27, which I think runs into more than 100 pages, right? I think the title for the record is What Lies Beneath the Truth? A Literature Review on Fake News, False Information, and More, IPS. I think because there is a record, it might be useful for you to say yes, because
yes.
Nodding the head doesn't capture.
And a very good morning to everyone.
Thank you. Let's look at your representation and report and go through very quickly. There's nothing, I think, particularly controversial. If you look at paragraph 4 of your report, I think the main point you make is that it is possible, there are 4 characteristics to fake news. We don't need to go through them, but you have identified 4 characteristics, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. And if you look at your June 2017 report, page 13 onwards, you have also made the point, after some looking at the research, that it's possible to come to some criteria on what is fake news, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, you then refer at paragraph 7 to the Edelman Trust Barometer report, which I think has a survey of more than 33,000 respondents over 25 countries. And I think the point is that more than 70% of respondents worry about false information and weaponization of fake news. And you refer to that at paragraph 7,
Yes.
right? Yeah. And over 60% agree that the average person does not know how to tell good journalism from rumors or falsehoods. That is significant, right?
Yes.
And it shows the difficulties in dealing with fake news.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Again, sorry, I think it's best
Yes,
that we have a yes.
it is.
Right. And I think you make the point again in paragraph 7 of your report that more people in Singapore worry about false information or fake news being used as a weapon compared with people in Canada, Ireland, Japan, and Germany.
Yes.
Yeah. And if we look at paragraph 11 of your report, you make the point that YouTube, Facebook, WhatsApp are the 3 more common platforms in which deliberate online falsehoods are disseminated and circulated.
Yes.
Yeah. And again, in paragraph 11, you make the point, and I quote, according to We Are Social, the top 3 most commonly used social media platforms in Singapore in 2017 were YouTube at 75%, Facebook at 72%, WhatsApp at 67%. followed by Instagram at 43% and Facebook Messenger at 42%.
Yes.
Yeah. And at paragraph 13, you make the point that for ease of reference, I'm going to call them DOFs, deliberate online falsehoods. In the form of coordinated, insidious efforts, disrupting democratic processes in a country are a severe threat. That's your view.
Yes.
Yeah. And let's go through paragraph 13. You say, however, what pose a more severe threat or high breach are the coordinated and insidious efforts targeted at disrupting democratic processes in a country. To date, there are no published or publicly recorded incidents involving such high breach, deliberate online falsehoods in Singapore. This could be due to existing laws that govern both online and offline discourse in the country. Take it from me for the time being that, and I will show you something later, that the existing laws don't adequately cover the problem. But the main point here is you have not come across or have heard of any major attacks that have tried to disrupt our democratic processes. That's really what you're saying.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean there aren't any.
Yes.
Yeah. But I think you would be aware of a fairly significant cyber attacks on ministries in Singapore.
Yes.
Yes.
You have heard. And to the extent that one can know about these things, I think one can assume that these are attacks that originate from outside, perhaps from a foreign state actor, given the nature of the targets. Correct?
That could be an assumption, yes.
Yes. But given that among the targets of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you would assume that a foreign state actor could well be behind it.
That could be an assumption, yes.
Right. And it is something that any government should take seriously.
Certainly.
Right. Now, you also say deliberate online falsehoods in the same paragraph are part of a disinformation campaign, have wreaked havoc in domestic politics and allegedly influenced referendum and election outcomes in other countries.
Yes.
Right? And you say Russia has been found to use social media platforms as a military tactic, part of the Gerasimov doctrine, to create permanent chaos within an enemy state.
Yes.
Right. Now, when we mention Russia, and for that matter any other country, I think we should, at least from the select committee's perspective, I think we have, and the government's perspective, we've got to make one point clear. None of us have any objective evidence to come to any conclusion about Russia or any other country, right? And I think the way we will approach this is that this is what has been stated in research, in public, and by other governments, and it's something that we ought to take note of without having to conclude that a particular country was responsible or was not responsible, right? We'll
Yes.
approach it in that way. You also say, compared to traditional military engagement, disinformation campaigns provide plausible deniability, right?
Yes.
And according to testimony submitted by Facebook to the US Senate Judiciary Committee in October 2017, approximately 29 million Americans were directly exposed to 80,000 posts from 120 Russian-backed pages, right? That was the evidence.
Yes.
And the reach was magnified multiple times through shares, likes, and follows, correct?
Yes.
And as a result, Russian-sponsored content reached as many as 126 million Americans on Facebook during and after the 2016 presidential elections.
Yes.
That's 1/3 of the American population,
Yes.
more than a third. And in January 2018, Twitter had said it will inform nearly 700,000 people in the country that have either followed a troll account linked to the Internet Research Agency, IRA, a Kremlin-linked internet troll army that meddled in the election, or retweeted or liked a tweet from one of its accounts. I'm quoting your written representation. Yes. And more recently, the US Justice Department charged 13 Russians, 12 of whom were set to work for the IRA, and 3 companies for using stolen identities to pose as Americans and for creating Facebook groups. For example, Secure Borders and Blacktivists, to distribute divisive content to subvert the election and support the Trump campaign. Yes?
Yes.
Yeah. You give another example in paragraph 14 on Brexit. The British lawmakers have also announced that they are investigating possible Russian interference in the Brexit referendum that took place in January 2016, right?
Yes.
And researchers at the University of Edinburgh found 419 Twitter accounts linked to the IRA, which had attempted to influence UK politics in November, correct?
Yes.
Now let's look at the motivations that people may have for producing fake news. You deal with it in paragraph 5 onwards. I think you say the motivations for fake news can be political, financial, for the purpose of mischief, or simply as a result of misleading reporting, right?
Yes.
Political, the producers of DOFs are astute in exploiting the pain points found in political systems and societies, capitalize on people's anxieties, doubts, fears, insecurities, paragraph 8. Correct?
Yes.
And in the same paragraph, for instance, domestic and foreign DOFs producers stoked already high tensions excuse me, during election periods by targeting citizens who rallied behind different party lines in the US and by leveraging the highly polarized nature of politics in Kenya.
Yes.
The alternate right communities in France and Germany spread anti-immigrant falsehoods, capitalizing on societal strains and tensions that have been simmering between citizens and the immigrant population as a result of the immigration crisis in Europe, correct?
Yes.
And you give some additional examples nearer home, paragraph 16. Online falsehoods are spread about Islam being under threat and Chinese communism posing a threat to Indonesian society,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And in one prominent case, there was a doctored video of then governor, popularly known as Ahok, delivering an allegedly anti-Islam speech that went viral online, correct?
Yes.
And that was doctored.
Yes.
Another was rumors that the Indonesian Democratic Party of Struggle that backed Ahok was linked to the Communist Party of China, correct?
Yes.
And there was also fake news that 10 million Chinese workers were taking over locals' jobs when the official figure was 21,000, right?
Yes.
And these fakes, these DOFs, had real consequences because hundreds of thousands of Muslims gathered on the streets to protest against Ahok and demanding his arrest, paragraph 16, correct?
Yes.
Now, this is a point you make quite strongly later on, and we'll come to it, and particularly in your report. But really, what you're dealing with here is the use of fakes, DOFs, altered, doctored videos, and fake news to appeal viscerally to people, to their emotions, to their group identity, and once inflamed, it's almost impossible to deal with this through subsequent fact correction and checking, right?
Yes. So you're right to say that this is based on the research that we've done, right? So
Yes.
essentially, whenever we talk about what are some of the possible, say, conflicts
Yes.
that may be stoked
Right.
by DOFs,
Yes.
deliberate online falsehoods, I think we really need to look at the various countries
Yes.
involved, because clearly what is one country's pain points are very different from another country's. right?
Absolutely.
So yes, there's definitely a danger of these DOFs in terms of posing threats to public order and national security if they are
Yes.
able to effectively exploit existing cleavages, say, among communities, for instance.
Yes. Now, paragraph 15, you say, by reference to the French presidential elections, fake news stories that exploited social tensions arising from immigration and religion, correct?
Yes.
And I'm not going to pronounce the name of this French opinion website. It's an article published in, I think it's considered one of the most prominent French far-right opinion websites. Do you want to formally acknowledge his statements?
Okay, I would like to welcome Mr. Pritam Singh to the committee. Thank you.
Let me restart. It's one of the most influential French far-right opinion websites. Received about 1.6 million engagements from Facebook, Twitter, and other social media platforms in the months between 5th of March 2017 and 5th of May 2017. Paragraph 15, footnote 39, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And there was a video posted on Twitter which claimed that Muslims in London were celebrating a terrorist attack that happened in Paris, which left a policeman dead, right?
Yes.
That video was posted by a leader of Britain First, a far-right British political organization. And actually the video was taken from Pakistanis celebrating a cricket match, a victory back in 2009, much earlier. I think paragraph 15, footnote 40.
Yes.
Then you talk about financial motivations. Financial gains could be a motivator, and you refer to Real Singapore and Global News, the sensational articles drawing eyeballs and readership, paragraph 10 of your written representation.
Yes.
Right. You have given several examples, and really it is possible that these examples can multiply.
Yes.
Yes. Now, you have made the point at paragraphs 8 and 9 that the current situation in Singapore is not as serious, right?
Yes.
Right. I think it is important to understand why that is so, and I'm going to refer you to something one of the other representatives is going to say, Dr. Matthews. If it will be given to you, I think certainly it will be flashed across on the screen, Dr. Matthews' representation. And I want to refer to page 3 of his representation. I think I can ask members to look at the screen if they can't get it. But I think, Dr. Soon, you can see the screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. If you look at the last 3 paragraphs, even outside of elections, we have to guard against online falsehoods that seek to harm our social fabric. If not tackled with haste, their spread and discussion can sow discord and widen the divisions already present at several levels between racial and religious groups, and increasingly between born and bred Singaporeans and new citizens, or between citizens and immigrants. Such acts in combination and over an extended period of time can have a corrosive effect. They progressively chip away at the harmony and cohesion that has been built up over time between different communities. Rifts then become schisms as polarized communities move further and further apart. This would leave Singapore even more vulnerable to attempts to wreck the high levels of security and stability which have allowed us to be a successful hub. Now, I'm just showing you that, and that to make some points to you on the current situation. I mean, you can look around the world and see what the situation is in respect of ethnic tensions, the relationship between communities. You don't have to go very far. The region, as well as further afield. You look at Europe, you look at the US, you look at the deep schisms and fault lines between communities along racial lines and also along religious lines. Why don't we have that? I would say, see whether you agree with me. We have at present a legislative framework which is fairly strict and prohibits racial religious speech. That tells you what you cannot do, but that alone cannot build confidence between the communities. In addition, I think you're aware of our very substantial social policies that try and engender cohesion, a lot of effort on education, grassroots, building a harmonious community. Would you say those are the reasons done over 50 years that the situation here is very different from other religiously divided and racially divided communities?
Yeah, we agree.
Right. Now, supposing we had followed the approach of many countries, particularly European, where I think ideology often trumps objective assessment of what is necessary. If supposing over the years, we had not prohibited hate speech, ridicule, putting down another race and religion, and we had, say, in the name of freedom of speech, allowed the burning of the Holy Quran or the Bible, which is allowed in some countries. Supposing we had not taken a strict view on all of these, prohibit hate speech, ridicule, putting down another race and religion. Supposing we had allowed newspapers like Charlie Hebdo to attack religions, and you know how they attack religions. They put cartoons of Catholic nuns masturbating, they put obscene pictures of the prophet, and equal opportunity, they attack all religions in the same way. And we allowed, say, racially segregated communities to develop, like in some European countries, as opposed to, say, the ethnic integration policy that we have in our housing estates. And supposing we didn't actively work on building community bonding across races and religions, and assuming we, like some capitals in Europe, allowed extremist preachers from all religions to come and preach here, you can imagine that the situation could be quite different from what you're seeing now, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. And these are all highly sensitive matters, and really, it's a delicate balance, and if you're not careful, racial, religious divides, as you can see from the rest of the world, are easy to exploit and make worse, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, let me show you what another representative, Dr. Shashi Jayakumar, has said. Again, I think it's best to look at the screen. This is from page 3, the second paragraph. There exist individual consultants and private sector entities specializing in hacking or interfering with elections with the aim of achieving the desired election results for the client. Their methods include smears, hacking, spoofing, web pages, and sending mass emails to influence outcomes. More broadly, there also appears to exist a growing shadow market for methods to influence target populations, outcomes in nations using methods like those offered by Cambridge Analytica, the company which is said by some reports to have profiled and micro-targeted the US electorate during the 2016 presidential elections. And at page 4, paragraph 2, but who are the individual players at the heart of asymmetric and specifically information warfare doctrine? Generally speaking, powers using these techniques deploy a range of tactics. Information warfare, which combines intelligence, counterintelligence, disinformation, subversion through proxies, and psychological pressure. Given the sheer range of stratagems, actors attempting to undermine societies through disinformation or influence operations need not necessarily use an organized cadre of specialists. Russian sources have from time to time also indicated that they possess information troops, but this has been a widely misunderstood term. As military expert and head of Center for Military Forecasting, Anatoly Zyganok, had observed, the personnel of the information troops should be composed of diplomats, experts, journalists, writers, publicists, translators, operators, communication personnel, web designers, hackers, and others. And at, over the page, paragraph 1, one starts reading from page 4, actually. Major powers such as Russia and China have the ability to get their netizens to do the bidding of the state with very little nudging or recompense. And then he describes Russia's actions. And then if you go over the page, one expert from a Western European country told the present author that disinformation in his country was carried out by not more than 10 individuals with pronounced right-wing sympathies living in Moscow. Some, according to him, were paid, but others felt a strong ideological impetus. They felt that their country had gone down the wrong path when it came to multiculturalism in terms of its immigration and refugee policy, felt themselves and the fake social media accounts they had created will aid in the legitimate resistance that would bring their country to the correct path again. So you can have states with massive resources. You can also actually have 10 individuals who use modern methods to wreak havoc, right?
Yes.
Page 7 of the same representation, the first paragraph. Any nation, this is on Singaporean implications, any nation operating on a democratic model with regular elections and an open internet regime should be watching carefully the techniques and tactics tried by powers that have tried to influence and undermine society in countries such as the United States and in Europe. But beyond this, what is urgently required is serious study of the particular effect that organized disinformation campaigns can have on states that are polyglot and multiracial and which are also data-rich, states that aim to be smart nations. That perfectly describes us, doesn't it?
Yes.
These would be tempting targets. An aggressor could attempt to peel off one particular ethnic group or religion using social media and disinformation to appeal, as the case may be, to deeply ingrained historical, cultural issues, setting off one group against others or even against the government. Singapore can be a sandbox for subversion. You would agree with those comments?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, can we go to your report itself, the June 2017 report? And if I can invite you to turn to page 20 of your report. And if you don't have it, it'll be flashed on the screen. I think if I can take it very briefly in the first paragraph and summarize what you have said. One of the key issues in the context of analyzing fake news is how people receive news and treat it, right? Individual human biases, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. So let's deal with some of them. At page 20, you deal with confirmation bias. And at page 21, second paragraph, you say, since then, other studies have also demonstrated the same phenomenon. For example, a study which sought to understand the effect of one's prejudices on processing scientific information found that individuals with higher prejudice towards homosexuals perceived fictitious scientific information that confirmed homosexual stereotypes as more convincing than individuals with lower prejudice. The reverse was true for individuals with lower prejudice towards homosexuals. Really, even science is subject to one's confirmation bias, right?
Yes.
The next paragraph, you say, confirmation bias and selective exposure also affect how people seek information. In a study by Brock and Balloon, 1967, research subjects listened to pre-recorded speeches on refuting arguments that linked smoking with lung cancer and on the hypocrisy and wrongdoings of Christianity. And you describe it, but essentially, because of confirmation bias, two different groups of people can read the same research and come away with different takes based on their own confirmation bias, correct?
Yes.
Right. Then you deal with motivated reasoning, which is at page 22 of your report. Well, actually, I should finish off the point on confirmation bias first. This is again at page 22, second paragraph. You say, in short, the presence of confirmation bias in information processing suggests that individuals may have a tendency to uncritically accept false information as true simply because it is consistent with their pre-existing beliefs and resist or dismiss corrections that contradict them, correct? That's a very powerful conclusion.
Yes.
Then we go on to motivated reasoning. This is in the fourth paragraph in that page, page 22. You say motivated reasoning refers to the notion that people's motivations may cause them to seek justifications for their desired conclusions, thus permitting them to believe what they want to. So people have certain belief systems. They go and seek out the information they want, and then that allows them to believe what they want, correct?
Yes, and they
Yes.
also process it in a way that suits their desired outcomes.
And that makes fake news quite powerful.
Yes, that's the potential.
Right. Again, on motivated reasoning, page 23, you say, apart from reducing cognitive dissonance, individuals also engage in motivated reasoning to preserve their self-identity and group identity. False beliefs held by individuals are often attached to a group to which individuals belong. Thus, people are motivated to defend their beliefs in the face of counter-evidence because if they do not, they risk losing their identity and membership in the group that they are in. This also explains why some people are more inclined to believe false information that others easily dismiss. And you refer to some research, but essentially, if you are a member of a group, it can be a religious group, it can be an ethnic group, it can be a political group, it can be some kind of community identity. That sense of belonging to that group is very powerful, and that allows you more easily to accept fake news and dismiss truth, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Again, if I can cross-refer you to what Dr. Shashi has said at page 7, an aggressor, this is the first paragraph, somewhere in the middle, could attempt to peel off, we saw this earlier, and I asked you to recall this. So that fits in with the research that you have put out in your report, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. And on a similar point, Dr. Matthews as well, at page 3, such deliberate, premeditated attempts to spread false rumors have occurred before, and he refers to the Rail Singapore, and he refers to a number of incidents which go along religious lines and ethnic lines, and that fits in with your research as well, correct?
Yes.
Now, and he points out at page 2, on a survey, I think you're aware of this survey, you must be aware, that 44% of Singaporeans in the survey agreed that people from some races compared to others are more violent. 60% of Chinese respondents thought that less than half of Malays or Indians would return their wallet. And it suggests to you that even in Singapore, the racial divide is there in fairly significant numbers, right?
Yes, there's still the persistence of stereotypes,
Yes.
unfortunately.
I mean, it's a long group identity. I trust a Chinese more than I trust a Malay or Indian, or I trust Indian more than I trust a Chinese or Malay, depending on which racial group I belong to.
Yes, and this phenomenon would not be unique to us.
It's not unique to us. Yeah. And in fact, my point, if anything, is reverse. There are people who think that we are a post-racial society. I think the point is not to forget that we are not quite there.
Yes.
Right. Page 5 of Dr. Matthews' report, he says targeted ads. In an age where ads bought on Facebook can be targeted to different communities based on their demographic and political characteristics, the Russians were able to increase anxiety among different groups through featuring threatening information about another group to heighten tensions among groups already wary of one another, according to a Washington Post report. Concerted campaign of Russians also accentuated racial concerns among African Americans, urging them to see Hillary Clinton as an enemy, stay at home on polling day, an article in The Economist magazine pointed out. Your point really that we are not unique. The articles say the Russians were able to target racial communities in the United States. Any racial community anywhere in the world is capable of being targeted with modern technology and algorithms, right?
Yes.
Right. And really, those putting out DOFs, some of them are pretty good at exploiting these divisions, right?
Yes.
I think there is some other material that just emphasizes this point. It's an important point and we should look at it. Can I invite you to look at Nugroho's representation, the number 61st representer, and we'll flash it on the screen for you at page 2. This is on Indonesia. We believe that the causes of why Indonesian people are easy to spread misinformation are not only of the low literacy problem, but also because of polarization between people with different ethnics, religion, political affiliations, other interests. The partisanship of several mainstream media also further fuels this situation. Some people leaving mainstream media, but unfortunately went into using rogue websites as a source of information. So again, your point, ethnic diversity and resultant tension is not unique to any particular country, but we have it in the region as well as in Europe and the United States, correct?
Yes.
Right. And if you look at Jennifer Young, she put in the 82nd representation at paragraph 35. She says, as part of the largest Southeast Asian entity, Singapore is one of the most religiously diverse countries in the world. You are aware of that fact, obviously. Thank you. It is also home to various ethnic groups. The possibility of ethno-religious fault lines being exploited by fake news is a very real one in the city-state. You would agree with that?
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Soon, if I can refer you back to your report now, page 24, you go on to a different subheading, which is a political identity and motivated reasoning. Page 24, first paragraph. You say research has established that an individual's political beliefs and identity contribute to motivated reasoning and can increase one's susceptibility to believing false information. That's correct, isn't it? I think
Yes.
fairly clear. And a point we have come to earlier, but in the same page, last paragraph, motivated reasoning and one's political identity also play a role in an individual's rejection of the validity of scientific source. So you can put a properly researched, independent, objective, scientific point across, and the recipient will probably reject it if he is subjected to politically motivated reasoning.
Yes, that's what the research shows.
Right.
Yeah.
And over the page 25, I think this is, again, based on the research, the summary. In short, motivated reasoning explains that people accept and reject false information differently depending on how the information supports or contradicts their deeply held beliefs and identity. So that's, again, what the research shows. That's a good summary of the research so far.
Yes.
Thank you. Page 26 of your report, you refer to belief systems. Item, the second paragraph, if I can read. However, social psychologist Daniel Gilbert and his colleagues argued that acceptance of a piece of information as true is part of the automatic comprehension of that information. Its rejection only occurs in the face of counter-evidence subsequent to and more effortfully than its acceptance. So to go and first, it's easy for people to accept what they read, and if you want to go and counter it, it takes much more effort, in simple terms.
Yeah. It requires more effort and more thinking on how to do it effectively.
Thank you. Page 28, you talk about belief perseverance, the first paragraph. Another factor which accounts for the persistence in the beliefs of false information is a common phenomenon known as belief perseverance, where individuals retain newly created beliefs even after being informed that the initial information on which the beliefs were based was incorrect. Research also shows that. Thank you.
Yes.
And the last paragraph in the same report, your report. In other words, I think these are your own conclusions. In other words, belief perseverance suggests that impressions once formed are difficult to change. Thus, once a piece of false information is out in the open, it may be too late to retract or blunt its influence. While fact-checking efforts can meticulously point out falsehoods, they may be limited in their ability to undo the beliefs and impressions created when people first encounter the false information. That's your conclusion.
Yes.
Thank you. Page 29. Let's look at the first paragraph. Here you talk about the illusory truth effect. Psychological research has also established that repeated exposure to false information can influence people to believe that a falsehood is true. And you go on later in the paragraph. The researchers concluded that repetition of a plausible statement increases a person's belief in the referential validity or truth of that statement. Again, research is fairly clear on that.
Yes.
Thank you. So actually, repetition makes the situation far worse.
Yes.
If one can put it that way. And later in that page, the last paragraph. These researchers demonstrated that familiarity increases perceived accuracy of plausible information. Another study on the effect of fake news on the 2016 US presidential election showed that illusory truth effect extends to highly implausible and partisan statements as well. In this study, researchers found that a single exposure to fake news headline was sufficient to lead to an increased perception of accuracy. A second exposure to a fake news headline led to an even greater perception of accuracy, with the effect compounding over time. Furthermore, the increased perceptions of accuracy for familiar fake news headlines occurred despite the presence of explicit warning labels that indicated that the story was contested by fact checkers. Research also found that the illusory truth effect happens even to people with knowledge about the topic. So even when it's highly implausible, these effects come into play, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Over the page, cumulatively, these research findings suggested that exposing people to false information will increase belief in the false information as people rely on familiarity as a heuristic in their cognitive processing. Repeated false information feels more familiar and truer, even if it goes against what an individual already knows. As a result, exposure to false information may have long-term effects, while corrections, unfortunately, be short-lived. That's the research, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Next, we go to the backfire effect, which you deal with at page 31. If you look at the third paragraph, refuting a false belief often involves mentioning the false information itself, thus making people more familiar with falsehood. Similar to the illusory truth effect, The familiarity backfire effect is based on the idea that familiarity towards a piece of information increases its chances of being accepted as true. Thus, the act of debunking false information may reinforce it in people's minds. Ironically, I say ironically, this is demonstrated by a study which found that identifying medical claims as false helped people remember it as false in the short term, but paradoxically increased its chances of being remembered as true after a 3-day delay. That's again the research.
Yes.
Then you go on to the, let's look at one more thing. Page 32, second paragraph. Research has shown that worldview backfire effect is particularly strong when it involves correct information that challenges people's sense of cultural identity and worldviews, i.e. their fundamental beliefs and about how society should operate. So if we take a pause there, you have talked about different neurological effects, the confirmation bias, motivated reasoning, and now here the backfire effect and others. You identify several more very usefully, and we'll go through them. But just looking at what we have now, the fact that people tend to identify with groups, the fact that people tend to look out and search for information on their own, what confirms what they already believe, the fact that people filter out what doesn't accord with their beliefs, even if what comes through is factually correct and authoritative. The fact that people refuse and reject anything that challenges their group identity, these are all powerful factors that lead to people, at least based on the research that we've looked at so far, that lead to people accepting fake news that's cleverly targeted, correct?
Yes, if I may add?
Sure.
If I can clarify some things. I think in our submission, we talked about, like you rightly pointed out, the different types of DOFs that's, we have observed in Singapore as well as outside Singapore. So we have also, in our submission, kind of divided the DOFs into what we call low breach and high breach.
Yes.
And the various examples that you raise pertaining to the DOF's potential to harm, say, racial and religious harmony and social cohesion are what we cited as examples of high breach DOFs.
I understand.
Which we also said should be the areas that the government and also various stakeholders perhaps should focus on and dedicate more resources to.
Yes.
So the crux then is what needs to be done. We talked about why this situation...
I do intend to come to what needs to be done and deal with your written representation.
Sure.
You can either say it now or you can deal with it later on when we come to it.
Okay, all right. So talking about the various psychological mechanisms or the human fallibility that you mentioned, confirmation bias, motivated reasoning, worldview backfire effect, etc. You're right. These are the things that we have reported in our study based on the research that we have combed through.
Yes.
What we have also noticed is that who are some of these people who may be more susceptible,
yes,
right, to some of these biases, etc. So what our research also showed is that essentially, people who are more susceptible to these biases, they could have maybe occupy extreme ends of the political spectrum. So in other words, people who are, very strong conservatives or very strong liberals, they are more likely, to be susceptible to these biases, right? So that would leave us with, say, the middle ground or the people who are the moderates.
Actually, my concern is not so much with people with strong political beliefs. It's more group identity based on racial and religious lines. And that's where I would be focusing on when we come to some of what we need to do.
All right, so we can talk about that then.
Yes. Thank you. Now, page 34, you talk about emotions and negativity bias. The second paragraph. Research also found evidence of a negativity bias where information that evoked negative emotions in general has a stronger impact than information that evoked positive emotions. Studies have shown that information that evokes negative emotions is processed more thoroughly, leaving a stronger impression and also more resistant to disconfirmation than information that evokes positive emotions. That is across the board to everyone, right? Not people on extreme ends of the political spectrum.
Yes.
This is general.
Yes.
Right. Likewise, the heuristic tendencies that we spoke about leave out politically motivated reasoning. But confirmation bias, backfire effect, motivated reasoning based on group identity, those apply to all sectors of the population in general. Those are not restricted to any ends of the spectrum, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Now, okay, last paragraph in page 34. Emotions also influence the sharing and dissemination of information, while the believability of a piece of information is a determining factor of whether it will be shared. Research has found that information which evokes an emotional response is more likely to be shared and passed on, irrespective of its believability. And then you identify a set of researchers who found that in the case of rumors, the emotion disgust evoked by the rumors encourages people to share them. Contemporary urban legends are also more likely to spread on the internet if they evoke disgust. Other studies have also pointed to the role of fear and anxiety in influencing belief and spread of rumors and conspiracy theories. That again applies to pretty much the average population, correct?
Yes. So if you look at the research that are cited here,
Yes.
some of them are relatively old, but these are seminal work. I think it would be quite instructive also for the members of the public here and everyone in the room if we just briefly discuss the recently released MIT study,
Yes.
which also looked at the human factors behind the spread of false news on Twitter.
Right.
So they looked at a huge number of tweets over a 10-year period. And yes, the role of emotion was also found by this study to play quite an important role in explaining why false news disseminate further and deeper than real news.
Okay, thank you. Now let's look at page 35. Thank you for that. It adds to the material that we have to read. We have read, but which we have to digest further. 35, page 35, last paragraph. Together, these findings explain why false information involving child abuse, deviant sexual behavior, flesh-eating bacteria are more quote-unquote successful or endemic than others. Information that produce strong negative emotions like disgust, anger, fear are more likely to be spread by people, regardless of whether they are true or false, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. We go to page 36. Don't worry, I don't intend to take all 100 pages in this way, but a number of key points come from your report. If we look at the second paragraph, and I think this is very, very helpful. If I may pick it up from the line, however, research suggests that there may be, in fact, neurological basis underlying confirmation bias, and that using confirmation bias to make decisions makes us feel good in the same way people experience the positive effects of alcohol or opiate. Individuals get a rush of dopamine when they find confirming data similar to when they eat chocolate, have sex, or fall in love. Thus, people tend to focus on information that supports their confirmation bias and ignore information that contradicts their beliefs. In other words, it feels good to stick to our guns even if we are wrong. This describes the broad population, correct?
Yes.
Secondly, Dr. Soon, I was a bit taken aback when I read this, but I don't see how truth can compete with alcohol or opiate or love or sex or chocolate.
I think the devil
Very
is in
difficult, right?
The devil is in the details. We need to see how we can like market truth. Yeah.
I think you said it elsewhere as well in your report that fact-checking and truth comes a distant second. We'll come to that later.
Sure.
Yeah. Then next, last paragraph. Another study published in Nature demonstrated that challenging an individual's political beliefs activates the areas in the brain that are involved in personal identity and emotional response to threat. Researchers using neuroimaging to investigate the neural systems involved in maintaining political beliefs in the face of counter-evidence. They presented 40 liberals with arguments that contradicted their strongly held political beliefs. The study found that when the subjects were challenged on their strongly held political beliefs, there was more activation in the areas of the brain that correspond with self-identity and negative emotions. So broadly, just now you said it's that some part of the research is in relation to people at either end of the political spectrum. But reading this, it seems to me that as long as people have, and they can be middle ground, they can be normal people, they can be you and me, as long as they have strongly held political views, there will be these neurological responses, correct?
Yes, I mean, essentially, to put it in a nutshell, human beings, we're not just creatures of physical comfort, but we are also creatures of mental comfort.
I think that puts it very accurately. Thank you. Over the page, page 37. This suggests that humans may in fact be neurologically hardwired to engage in motivated reasoning and hold on to our pre-existing beliefs in the face of counter-evidence. I think that's pretty much what you said just now. Thank you.
Yes.
Page 38, we then deal with social influence. You point out that a conformity cascade. That's in the third paragraph. In conformity cascades, people tend to go along with the majority regardless of their private views and doubts in order to conform to the positive expectations of others and maintain membership in the group. The effect of conformity cascades are especially strong in social networks of tightly knit groups with a strong stake in group beliefs. That is correct, isn't it?
Yes.
And next paragraph, in informational cascades, people tend to believe in a rumor because a significant number of others appear to believe it as well. When people lack information of their own, they tend to rely on the words, opinions, and deeds of others as valid evidence of reality. This is also partly because of the false consensus effect, where people tend to think that something is probably true if they hear it from many other people. Those are all true statements based on research.
Yes.
Right. And the last paragraph. In short, people might be more susceptible to believing false information if many others appear to believe as well, or if they are willing to overlook their own skepticisms in order to affirm and demonstrate their membership in a group. That again applies to the broad middle ground, normal people, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. If we can skip a little bit and go to page 41 now. You talk about source layering and source credibility. The second paragraph. In general, the proliferation of information sources online has caused individuals to rely more on cognitive heuristics rather than systematically processing information. Often these shortcuts used to assess the credibility of information sources can cause individuals to be more susceptible to perceiving false information as accurate. there is so much information online, I think if I can just put it in layman terms, that people just react to it with the normal cognitive heuristics rather than properly analyzing and assessing them, correct?
Yes, they use mental shortcuts.
Thank you. And last paragraph, research has shown that instead of systematically processing the content of a website, users tend to rely on superficial aspects such as the overall visual appeal, layout, typography, font size, color schemes to assess the site's credibility, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. And next page, the third paragraph, Sundar's research. Sundar's research found that given such a chain of sources, readers generally do not possess all visible source cues when assessing the credibility of the information. Instead, the most proximate source cue, the friend, exerts the greatest influence in terms of credibility assessment. Then the distant source cues, example the politician, also presented on the interface. Furthermore, only people who are highly involved in the information topic would be more likely to systematically analyze the chain of source cues during credibility assessment. Again, research shows that. Common sense, really.
Yes.
Next paragraph. Given the findings of his research, Sundar further argued that because our friends tend to be perceived as the most proximate source cue, we tend to be less skeptical about the information shared by our friends because we trust them. And I think the concluding sentence in that paragraph, this can in turn increase people's chances of uncritically accepting false information as accurate, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Last paragraph. Research has also shown that people are less skeptical of information that they encounter in customized and personalized environments, and you give some examples, right?
Yes.
Now, page 44, the last paragraph. Algorithms are now being used to personalize information flow as well. For example, websites like Yahoo News, let's see, the New York Times funded a startup called NewsMe to cater their headlines to audiences' interests and desires. Basically now, international news media also provides you with getting the news that you want to read or you want to hear. Personalize it.
Yes.
Thank you. Go to page 45. First paragraph. We are now dealing with information filtering. While information filtering is not a new phenomena, as mentioned in section 3.1, the algorithm-driven filter bubble surrounds us with ideas consistent with our pre-existing beliefs, makes us overconfident in our mental frameworks, and dramatically amplifying our confirmation biases. A study on the spread of misinformation on Facebook found that the homogeneity of echo chambers was a primary driver of misinformation online. Filter bubbles may also increase group polarization, where deliberation among like-minded people often entrench false information such as false rumors. Research also shows that.
Yes.
Thank you. The next paragraph, however, data scientists at Facebook published a study that looked at how 10.1 million people of the most partisan American Facebook users interacted with socially shared news and argued that the filter bubble echo chamber effect may not be as potent as many people feared it to be. The study found that an average of 29% of the news stories displayed by Facebook's newsfeed presented views that conflicted with the user's ideology. In addition, the study also showed that individuals' choices of what information to consume had a stronger effect than Facebook's filtering algorithm. First, that study drew strong criticism, correct?
Yes.
And in fact, looking at the criticism of Manju in 2015, it does seem that some of the criticisms need to be answered, and they seem valid on the face of it, correct?
Yes.
Now, second, even accepting the Facebook study on its face value, you make the point. The findings of the study demonstrate that the filter bubble echo chamber effect is real and that Facebook's algorithm increases people's chance of encountering information, both true and false, that reinforces their worldview. Correct?
Yes.
Right. Now, page 46. We are now into bots. Page 46, second paragraph. Now, bots can be used in a variety of ways, and then you explain them, but basically, people using bots to completely mislead others. Correct?
Yes.
That, I think you will agree, has got nothing to do with free speech, using bots.
Yes.
It's in fact the very antithesis of free speech.
Yes.
Thank you. And I think at this stage, I would also like you to look at a Twitter article which indicates that falsehoods, I think are you aware of this? Falsehoods are 70% more likely to be retweeted than the truth. This is an article, I won't pronounce the names, Spread of True and False News Online.
Yes, so this is the MIT study.
Thank you. Let me show you now something that Professor Theo Lee Ann had put in. She is I think you might know her, professor at NUS Law School. She makes this point in her representation that the argument from democracy is as follows. Safeguarding free speech is to protect its key role in democratic society at whose core is free and open political debate, which includes the right to dissent from and contest government policy. Citizens have an interest in receiving information pertinent to actions of politicians and public affairs, to be able to understand public affairs, and to enable them to make an informed choice in electing representatives. For elected representatives, information is important to effective public debate and informed policy making. Now, I'm just telling you that that's the philosophical basis as put forward by Professor Theo for free speech. If you look at deliberate online falsehoods, we are not talking here about callousness and so on. We are talking about deliberate online falsehoods, and the amplifier effects are the fact that the way we are wired makes us much more receptive to falsehoods, much more likely to accept falsehoods, likely to reject truths if the falsehood has been cleverly targeted at us, coupled with newfangled things like bots, are actually the very contrary of this philosophy of free speech that Professor Theo has put out. Would you agree with that?
So these are the threats. These pose the threats to free speech.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I also want you to look at what the Swedish security chief recently said. We will refer to it, making the same point. It is a BBC article quoting, see the last two pages. It starts with creating uncertainty. The second last page first, please. Creating uncertainty, if I may read from there. Mr. Thornburg, I should tell you who Mr. Thornburg is. He's he's a 30-year veteran of the Swedish Security Service and the head of the Swedish Security Service. So he spent 30 years, he's entire public life, I suspect. And if we can go now to what he says, the second last page. Mr. Thornburg gives a number of examples of disinformation, including letters about arms deals with Ukraine bearing the forged signature of the defense minister. Then he cites some cases. These are based on religious divides. Then he says if they want to make uncertainty in our country, they are doing that. And this is Sweden we are talking about, a stable, prosperous, democratic society with a, you would say, a broadly common and strong identity. He says Sweden has seen espionage and cyber intrusions into the country's infrastructure from Russia and also China. For fake news is an increasingly talked about problem, and it can be created domestically, but Mr. Thornburg says his service has a role when foreign states may be behind it. And over the page, what we are doing is looking at what information could affect the well-being of our population, the functionality of our society, or could affect negatively our fundamental values, freedom of speech, democracy, individual rights. The MSB's head of global analysis and monitoring says. Now, so would you agree broadly with those comments?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Thornburg, in the first page that I showed you, also said he has never seen something like this in my career in the service in 30 years. Next, we can go to page 48 of your report. You talk about declining trust in media and journalism. First, if I may refer to the Edelman Barometer Trust, which you refer to, page 26 of the Edelman Barometer Trust. I think this is worldwide. It is a sort of general decline. Loss of truth, I'm not sure what is true and what is not. 59% say that. I do not know which politicians to trust, that's 56%. I don't know which companies or brands to trust, that's 42%. I think that's a general point that you make, right? In loss of trust.
Yes.
Next, can we go to page 40? This suggests, looking at the different institutions in the different countries, media is less and less trusted in many countries, correct?
Yes, but I think for this study, there was a criticism about the conflation, the term used for media.
I know.
If I'm not wrong, there is a separate question on specific to journalism.
Yes.
And that is a bit more hopeful.
I think what you're really saying is there was another question that divided people's views on mainstream media versus online media. And there the views differed in that mainstream media was more trusted than online media. Yes. I wonder if that's what you're referring to.
Yes.
Yes, it's a bit more hopeful. But of course, other representatives have said this, I'm not sure you have. One of the key things that people who are behind DOFs try and do is to actually attack and erode the trust in governments, in institutions, in mainstream media, in politicians of all stripes. That, in fact, is what they are trying to do. And I think you are aware of that phenomena as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, there is one paragraph here, the fourth paragraph, where you quote Mr. Mohan Dutta, and he says this, and I want to offer you a different perspective on this. Professor of Communications and New Media, Professor Datta, or Mohan Datta, said, quote, "Fake news is not a product of lack of regulation of new and digital public sphere, but rather a product of climate of backhand control of the public sphere by the power elite, which has contributed to public insecurities and public mistrust, further feeding the production, consumption, and circulation of fake news." I think I would like to deconstruct this paragraph because logically it makes no sense. And let me tell you why. First of all, fake news that is produced by foreign governments and targeted at a country along group, ethnic, racial, religious lines doesn't fit into this theory, correct?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Second, fake news produced for profit by these boys and girls sitting in Macedonia or wherever doesn't fit into this either.
I think, okay, our interpretation is regardless of the kind of fake news, so looking broadly at the impact of, say, fake news or DOFs in a given society, of course, this doesn't apply to all countries or regimes, right? So my reading is his observation is in countries where DOFs have a greater impact, you look at what's happening in the country, oftentimes it could be connected to, say, polarized politics, for instance, or institutions such as traditional or mainstream media being also very highly polarized in nature, resulting, contributing to the lack of trust among
if you
members of
say
the
that
public.
all that he is saying is these factors add to the polarization and make it more likely that the DOFs will travel, then that I can understand. Is that your interpretation?
Yes.
Right, okay. I mean, that then simply fits back into all the things we have already looked at. Supposing you didn't have these factors that Professor Datta refers to, everything else that I have taken you through still stands. The human biases, the negativity bias, the confirmation bias, the group identity, the fact that falsehoods travel much faster, the fact that falsehoods leave a much greater impression on us, the fact that the truth limps behind slowly. You've heard of that famous quotation. The truth limps behind slowly and does not quite eradicate the original false impressions, and in fact serves to reinforce the false impressions. The backfire effect, the hardwiring, the fact that we can be cleverly targeted by other countries, we can be cleverly targeted by commercial entities, by individuals. A group of 10 individuals can create havoc. All of those exist and can wreak havoc, but this factor can increase the effect, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Can we go to page 51? The first few lines, I think you say, research has found that a person's political beliefs is an important factor in contributing to motivated reasoning, thus increasing one's susceptibility to believing false information. That's in the research.
Yes.
And that applies to ordinary individuals?
Yes, especially for those who are really very partisan on extreme.
I suppose the way of putting it is the strength of belief depends on how partisan you are. Perhaps it's on a scale. As long as your political beliefs, you are hardwired to believe certain falsehoods more, and if you are more and more partisan, you become more and more entrenched in your beliefs. Would that be a fair way of describing it?
Yes, you're more likely to practice confirmation bias.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And the whole purpose of deliberate online falsehoods is to slowly push people, even from the middle ground, towards either end of the spectrums, correct? The
Yes.
purpose of DOF, you start out with people in the middle ground, you appeal cleverly to their ethnic identities, you appeal to their racial identities, then you target them politically, and you try and move them along the political spectrum to harden their attitudes. That's also an aim that we have seen in the events around the world, correct?
Yes, that could be a possible goal.
Right.
Yes.
And I think, are you not aware of actual events which have taken place along those lines?
Yes, so if we look
Yeah,
at
that's why.
some of the countries that, you
Yeah.
mentioned as well, so those who are more susceptible would be the communities who feel that they are threatened.
Right.
Or
No,
yes.
my question, I think you understood earlier, perhaps just to be clear, is this. You see, in any community, before, say, the mass advent of DOFs, you will have a spectrum of beliefs on any issue, well, on police, on public institutions, on each other, on race relations. And you will have people with extreme views, but broadly you will have people in the middle where views converge, and they may differ on specific aspects. I mean, that's, I think, a description of a stable society.
Yes.
The purpose of DOFs, the way we see it looking at the research now, is to take such a society, Sweden, for example, and then target the DOFs and try and polarize people and bring more and more people from the middle to
The extreme.
hard extremes, correct?
Yes.
And if you listen to what the Swedish security chief is saying, they seem to be succeeding in some countries. Yes?
Yes.
Thank you. I haven't even gone to the United States, which seems to be a far more extreme case. That's why I'm taking Sweden, which is a country that many of us would consider to be extremely well-run, moderate. Broadly, in fact, the ethnic identity is very, I won't say homogeneous, but there's a strong sort of a sense of a cultural and racial identity within the population. And you would expect Sweden to be one of the last countries in the world to be affected by this. So that is why I think the comments by the Swedish security chief are very, very pertinent, I think. But let's move on. Page 51. I think we have covered this. Maybe I can move on. Page 54. This is on education specifically. It's very interesting. You refer to research, I mean, the contrasting research, different research, but there is some research which also shows that education may have an opposite effect on an individual's susceptibility to believing false information. Individuals with high education or high levels of knowledge tend to be equipped to resist and counter-argue against information conflicting with their pre-existing beliefs. That seems to be common sense. But then the earlier passage you say in page 53, last paragraph, research has found that individuals' educational level also plays a role in influencing one's susceptibility to believing false information. Then you talk about people with low education. The reason were people with high education were less likely to believe in simple solutions for complex problems, felt more powerful, more in control of their circumstances. Now, however, can I put it this way, based on some other research that we have seen, that actually the research is not quite clear that even people with higher education levels seem to be susceptible to DOFs.
Yes.
Thank you. Next, page 55. If you look at last paragraph, this specifically deals with Russian disinformation, again, when I refer to Russia with my caveat, which I put in originally, Russian disinformation is another prime example of politically motivated false information propagated by governments. As mentioned in Section 2, defining fake news, disinformation refers to non-accidentally misleading information created with the intent to sow discord between enemy ranks. And you give various examples. I mean, whatever else, when it is a foreign state government which is focused on false information, using it as a weapon, that cannot be justified on free speech basis.
Yes.
And then now very quickly, we have referred to this before, page 56, second paragraph, you have put out here the well-known research of Macedonian kids running fake news websites. I'm sure it's not restricted to Macedonia anymore, but this is a fairly common phenomenon now, right?
Yes.
And high traffic is then rewarded by automated advertising engines, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think recently in Indonesia, we have
Yes.
action taken against a particular website.
Yes. They made a lot of money, right, as far as you can tell, before they were picked up.
Yes.
Yes. And you give various examples of the kinds of money that individuals can make. And then in the last paragraph at page 56, you point out that even organizations may have vested interest to produce and propagate false information. And over the page is you say how the tobacco industry, for example, put out research to obscure the truth and to try and dismiss scientific evidence that linked smoking to cancer and really flood people with so much that they get confused, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And that, for example, can have serious public health consequences, correct?
Yes.
Now, if we now go back to your report, written report. Let me just get that. Can I? Paragraph 17 of your written report. You point out that DOFs are a pressing threat because of the digital revolution, correct?
Yes.
And then paragraph 18, you point out that it lowers the barriers for entry to content producers. So anyone can be a content producer unhindered by barriers, financial outlay, and technical expertise, correct?
Yes.
So essentially today, anyone can publish. If they are smart enough, they can make sure it virals. They just have to make it more extreme and more untruthful and target it along racial, religious, or other divides. And then they use source layering, which you referred to. And you multiply that with fake accounts and bots. And you target at filter bubbles and echo chambers. And you can have quite a successful operation, correct?
Yes.
Now then you go on, if I can take you to paragraph 22. You say that really this is a very serious problem, paragraph 22, and you need a suite of measures, a host of measures, governmental and non-governmental interventions, correct?
Yes.
Right. Then you refer to self-regulation by tech companies, paragraph 36. You point out the code of conduct that they voluntarily agreed to, and you refer to the notice and take down procedure and how that can be made more effective, correct? by reference to the code of conduct.
Yes.
Yeah. And you also refer at paragraph 36 that while the tech companies have agreed to this, nevertheless, a report by the Justice Ministry in Germany found that tech companies were failing to meet their commitments.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, however, even if you cannot wholly rely on the tech companies, and I think you cannot, they have to be part of the solution, correct?
Certainly.
Right. Next, we come to fact-checking. I think we've already discussed it, but for the record, paragraph 29, you point out that it requires considerable effort to do fact-checking in a timely fashion. And you also say that the damage is often done before any debunking can come into effect. That's not cited here, but it is in your June 2017 report, page 59. You make that point as well, correct?
Yes. I think in our June report, we also discussed what then are the implications for fact-checking, how to make it better.
Yes. You point out at paragraph 29 that corrections need to reach a wider audience. And at the same time, I think you're aware, if you wish I can take you through them, but the existing research as of this year suggests that when you look at the consumption of fake news in many parts of the world, US presidential election campaign, and so on, the people who read the fake news often don't even see the fact-checking reports, correct?
Yes.
And second, I think we went through your report earlier. When they do, our natural tendencies are to dismiss them depending on our pre-existing viewpoints, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm not saying fact-checking is useless. My own view based on understanding of what you have said and what others have said is that we have to look at a whole host of solutions. And so the point here is that the tech companies' voluntary actions by themselves is not going to be adequate. Fact-checking by itself is probably a poor substitute for an effective remedy, though it has to be part of the solution. Would you agree so far?
Yes.
Okay. Then there are many reasons why fact-checking is weak, but we don't need to go into it. In paragraph 29, you point out that corrective information may actually not change people's beliefs, especially when the new information conflicts with their pre-existing beliefs. Again, it's not to say that we mustn't go down that route, but these are things that we need to bear in mind, correct?
Yes, these pose limitations.
Yes. Next, you refer to media literacy, again, as one of the possible steps. Again, my only point is that by itself is not going to be enough. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Thank you. Finally, at paragraph 35, on legislation, you point out that given the speed of technological advancements as well as issues of enforceability, you can have legislation, but you may find difficulties in enforcing them, correct?
Yes, enforcement is an issue.
Yes.
I mean, the fact how legislation can, say, keep up, right, and not limp behind, okay? Technological changes,
Right.
rapid technological changes, that's the other reason.
Right.
Yeah.
And you point out paragraph 35, the factors to take into account when considering regulatory, governmental, legislative type intervention, correct? You've got to look at the content, you've got to look at the context, you've got to look at the communicator's identity, intent, and consequence.
Yes, yeah, from section 30, paragraph 38, the 5
Yeah.
Cs, right?
Yeah. And then paragraph 42, you point out that there are gaps in the existing legal provisions, and your suggestion is that we can use existing law, amend it, rather than creating new law, correct?
Yes, so in paragraphs 42 and 43, we basically gave 5 reasons why the existing framework can be leveraged, why they work, how they're useful, because of 5 reasons, such as...
And how we
yeah.
can amend them to try and cover the existing gaps.
Yes.
Right. See, I speak like a lawyer because then that means that there are gaps that you can see, and your suggestion is we amend the existing laws to cover those gaps. Well, that's a matter for, I suppose, eventually the government to decide what's the best way to go. But I just wanted to understand that as an expert. You understand that there are gaps, and you have certain views on how those gaps can be covered. I want to take you through 1 or 2 points. In paragraph 42, you say that the legislation must be targeted to achieve certain safeguards. It must safeguard against harmful content, including removal of harmful or illegal content, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Paragraph 44, you point out that a current gap in existing legislation is that they do not sufficiently address the spread or dissemination of DOFs, correct?
Yes.
And again in paragraph 4, legislation at present doesn't deal with the virality of DOFs, correct?
Yes.
And paragraph 44, you feel that we need to be able to slow down or stop falsehoods from spreading, perhaps by way of notice and correct type of approach.
Yes.
Right. Now, just to help you, because I don't think you're legally trained,
No, I'm not.
I'll just show you a reference from the Dean of SMU, who has put in a representation, and just to tell you that he identifies clearly that there are a number of gaps in the current legislation. I think might be useful for your future research. If you can, it will be put on the screen for you, Professor Goi Han's report. Very quickly, if you look at paragraph 27, he gives a summary of some of the current legislation and what it covers and doesn't cover. You can see the table, right? It's self-explanatory. Then at paragraph 38, he tests the legislation against real-world situations, because in the end it must work.
Yes.
Or at least it must work in some of the situations. Then at paragraph 66, I think his conclusions. Broadly, the review illustrates that there are selected criminal, judicial, and executive levers which can be used to counter online falsehoods today. However, when applied to real-world situations, these tools run up against limitations of scope, speed, and adaptability. I think in your own way, in your report, you already recognize it, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, if I can, you finally suggest that in paragraph 45 as another solution, that an independent body be set up that advises on the type of DOFs to take action against. That's at paragraph 45.
Yes.
But can I suggest, given the speed and virality of DOFs, particularly, let's say, if it's targeted and used by a foreign power, and it's very cleverly targeted and it travels very quickly, the reactions also need to be very swift and fast. And an independent body that sits there, and you've got to present to it, and often there are limitations on what intelligence you can present to such a body. Do you recognize that maybe there are some severe limitations to this approach?
There are limitations.
Right.
Yeah, but when we proposed this, we were approaching it from the angle of, say, when in situations where there's, say, contention, and bearing in mind that there is a fair bit, if we look at the 5 Cs framework that we propose, there is a little bit of subjectivity involved. And
Yes.
I think that it's something that we cannot avoid simply because of the nature of the problem of DOFs. So which is why we felt that having an independent advisory panel comprising of people from different expertise and backgrounds may be able to play a useful role at informing the decision.
Maybe some sort of advisory panel, but some of the DOFs, I think, can fall within what you have said, but a DOF that is completely doctored, like Ahok making an anti-Muslim statement, I think doesn't require an independent panel to decide.
Yes.
Would you agree?
Yes, so I think we state in our proposal that we are certainly not making the suggestion that the panel has a say in every DOF,
Right.
but perhaps it can come in useful and certainly has some utility in
In
cases
some sort
that
of
are a bit
advisory
more,
capacity, perhaps.
yes, more dubious. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that is what I have for the time being. If any other thoughts, I will come back later. I think some of the other members may have questions for you. Thank you, Dr. Soon and Mr. Goh.
Okay, Mr. Sia Kemping, you indicated you want to ask a few questions. Please
Yes,
proceed.
thank you, Chair. Dr. Soon, Mr. Goh, good afternoon. I have three questions to ask. Let me start by saying that, well, you have highlighted that the various incidences of how the spread of DOF have caused havoc throughout the world. You also mentioned about the pain points will differ from country to country. What do you see as possible consequences and the possible pain points in Singapore?
So our pain points are enemy sweet spots, right? So, and clearly if we look at the kind of, from our research, the different types of falsehoods that perpetrated in other countries, it is clearly reflective of the social, political, and cultural milieu in that particular country context. So in the case of Singapore, as we have suggested in our submission, it will be issues pertaining to race, language, and religion, and perhaps national security, given that Singapore is a global hub. So that is one possible pain point.
I guess with increasing immigration, like you see in the situation in Germany, so tensions among the locals and immigrants, that could be another possible pain point for us as well.
Thank you. You also mentioned, amongst other things, that fact-checking is important but clearly insufficient. And you made a recommendation that non-government entities should set up such fact-checking sites. My question is, how do you envisage this to materialize in Singapore? Because it's not something that could happen naturally. So that's my question here.
If we again take a leaf from what's being done in other countries, so besides government-led fact-checking, which honestly we have not come across that many, we do see quite extensive fact-checking initiatives started by, say, for instance, mainstream media, right? So if you look at the case of the United Kingdom, the BBC has started its own fact-checking arm called the Reality Check. And quite a bit of thought is given into how do you package information in such a way that can debunk myths and falsehoods a bit more accurately. I mean, Minister Shanmugam earlier mentioned the various inherent human weaknesses that we have, and I think most of us acknowledge that. So really, when we talk about debunking, we have to look at those elements as well. So mainstream media could be one possible actor who can play a role in fact-checking, non-government fact-checking. The other would be really to look at perhaps forging partnerships among schools where students can play a role in fact-checking, and if that is built into, say, the curriculum, that could also have the other spillover positive effect of enhancing media or critical literacy. A third would be, if you look at the case of Indonesia, and I think the founder is one of your speakers this week, they have ground up fact-checking as well, right? In Singapore right now, I think we came across a Facebook page that started by members of the public. So, of course, the other question to ask is the authenticity or the quality of the fact-checking. So that is another separate question to consider.
Thank you. And my final question, at the last part, you opined that legislation plays a complementary role to the various countermeasures, and you propose this framework based on the 5 Cs, right?
Yes.
Specifically on communicators' intent, you focus quite a bit on disinformation. So is there any type of disinformation that you have in mind when you talk about disinformation?
So when we talk about, say, disinformation, it will be the manufacture of fake news or false information, especially if you look against together with the other C, which is context. Okay, this information that tries to exploit our pain points, as discussed earlier, would be some areas that we should look at. So the intent, deliberate intent to create this information, whether it's for political gains or to gain economic incentives by targeting racial sensibilities, for example, or to stir ill will between different communities, that could be one intent that we should pay more attention to.
Okay. Thank you. Chairman, that's all I have.
Thank you. Dr. Janil, you indicated you have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Sun, if I could just ask you a little bit with respect to the issue of the studies on Facebook and Twitter that we referenced earlier on. And am I right to understand that your view is that there's a difference in how you articulate the exposure to online information versus the consumption pattern of the users versus the internalization or the belief of that information? That exposure doesn't automatically lead to consumption. I think that's one of the things that the criticisms of the study and the authors themselves put up. But on some of the things that you have written about and said, also that consumption by itself doesn't automatically mean that one internalizes or understands those pieces of information.
Yes, so we talked about exposure, but the fact is certain human biases or and the fact that we have very little resources, given the amount of information explosion on the internet, already in a way kind of affects the way we select information or the kind of information that we expose to, hence selective exposure, right? And then linking to that, when it comes to consumption, yes, different people do process information differently, while there are inherent challenges such as confirmation bias, motivated reasoning,
Yes.
worldview backfire effect. They do affect people broadly, but it can be mitigated by certain factors as mentioned earlier.
Yes. But if you take the difference between exposure, consumption, and belief, together with the various biases that you've talked about, the confirmation biases and all the other biases, my understanding, the synthesis of what you're saying is that there's a significant asymmetry in the online space between information that is true or within your worldview versus information that is false and outside of your worldview. And that's my understanding, that
Yes.
the three components are separate and there is an asymmetry with respect to truth and falsity.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Leading on from that, for actors or organizations who have an interest in spreading deliberate online falsehood, there may be for a profit motive, it may be for a state-based motive or other motives. Once they have been able to successfully seed any or some deliberate online falsehoods, does the interplay of the factors that you have described, the biases and the asymmetry, does it not result in a self-reinforcing process to reinforce the effectiveness of the deliberate online falsehood as well as the reach of the deliberate online falsehood?
So essentially, you're talking about, let me rephrase the question. Are you asking if the perpetuation of, say, disinformation, to what extent will it leverage on people's biases?
No. My question is, once you've decided to perpetuate a deliberate online falsehood, and you've done so with any degree of success, does it not make it more likely that you are able to do it better the next time and more effectively the next time?
Yes,
because of the combination of the targeting that the online platforms have.
and the way people consume information, which can mitigate, efforts in, say, correction or debunking.
So once you've started down the path of spreading DOFs, you are only likely to see increasing success if you are getting your targeting correct.
That would be the implication of existing research, yes.
So last point, if someone starts to spread deliberate online falsehoods using these platforms to increase the polarity or the polarization of a society as described in Minister Shanmugam's questions to you, again, by analogy, once you have started the process of polarization, does not the interplay of that polarization and the biases and the asymmetry mean that there will be a self-reinforcing further success of both the polarization as well as the deliberate online falsehood? Once you have started to try to polarize a society, any success means it becomes increasingly easier to further polarize the society and increasingly easier for deliberate online falsehoods to spread.
Yes, that is assuming that, debunking is not done effectively. There is very little social immunity among members of the public. That would be one natural correlation.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Pritam Singh?
Dr. Soon, Mr. Goh, thank you so much for your submission. I have a question which pertains to the German Network Enforcement Act and a submission, and your specific submission at para 34, which raised concerns after its introduction from social media companies, free speech advocates, opposition political parties, independent media watchdogs, and so forth, about the consequences on freedom of speech. And I think towards the end of the paragraph, you did suggest that some have expressed concerns relating to the curtailment of speech if the line between falsehood and opinion is not drawn clearly, and the silencing of political dissent. Do you have any views on if legislation does take root in Singapore, should it take the form of the German example, or are there important differences that can be identified should we decide to go down that road?
Yeah. So I think that question is at the topmost consideration of, I think, many legislators and also various stakeholders in different countries. Whenever we talk about what are the best ways to tackle free speech, if legislation or regulation should play a role, oftentimes, and understandably so, there are worries about how it may stifle the freedom of speech. So I think essentially there are some underpinning principles that we should bear in mind when considering any legislative mechanisms, right? One of which is to really do the fine balancing, and I say fine balancing because it is not easy, okay? Do the fine balancing of the interests of protecting national security and public order with the interest of, enabling people to speak up and have meaningful discussions pertaining to governance, including, say, policies, right? And also enabling media, different forms of media, to report on issues of concern. That's one. And the other thing to seriously consider is we should not, through any legislation or regulation, have the unintended effect of undermining people's ability to, say, discern fact from falsehood. So here we are talking about, linking to our point to focus on very specific types of falsehoods. Hopefully, people can also learn to deal with the less insidious types, less low breach, and over time, be a lot smarter, be a bit more aware of their own biases and human weaknesses, and be able to do that. So if you talk about specifically about the NEA, why I think it was controversial and generated a lot of discussion. One, there are a few reasons, one of which is the apparent lack of thinking through and even consultation with social media companies, because at the end of the day, you are imposing a framework on them within which they have to abide and adhere to. So, for example, during the very first draft of the NEA, required social media companies not to just remove the illegal post. According to NEA, they use illegal posts. They don't specifically refer to fake news, but also to get social media companies to ensure that the material is not reposted. How viable is that? How feasible that is that? That's one big question. The other thing is also, perhaps a slight lack of understanding on the landscape, because I think NEA stipulates that the law would apply to social media companies with at least 2 million registered users. So critics have argued that 2 million registered users may not be a very realistic number. In fact, you should look at, say, active users, right? Because registered users could be active and, say, inactive. And the third thing, of course, is the censorship is pretty much left to social media companies themselves, which means that they have the responsibility of deciding what is criminal, what is not criminal, according to their criminal code and their penal code. So other criticisms on that front have also talked about how it actually empowers or gives too much power to social media companies to decide what people should see and what people should not see. So I think these are some of the things that we should consider when considering what approach should Singapore adopt.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Soon?
Yes, I would like to follow up on a point that Dr. Carol Soon makes on one of our subsequent representatives from Indonesia, Mafindo. I would like to say that even though they did mention the forming of an anti-hoax ecosystem amongst partners as a way to beat online falsehoods, in the same paragraph, they also say that there is a need to do so in a quick and efficient fashion. So I think this is the same point that Minister Shawn made earlier, which is that any reaction to online falsehoods needs to be fast, needs to be swift and fast. So I think this is something that Dr. Carol Soon would agree with.
Yes, it needs to be fast, and we see how other stakeholders, perhaps mainstream media, can also play a part in trying to reach out or push out the corrections as quickly as possible. Yeah, so speed is one, and as mentioned earlier, also the devil is in the details, how we design those debunking messages. They have to, if we talk about chocolates and sex, they have to be as sexy as the falsehoods, unfortunately. Thank you.
Minister, I think you've got one last question.
Couple really. One is administrative. I see from the transcript that when we talked about the panel that would help, I think pretty much my last question at page 70, line 7 for the transcript. My question was in an advisory capacity, and your answer was is as written here is more dubious. I don't think you said more. The suggestion was dubious. I think you are referring to maybe some of those where you are not clear whether it's a deliberate online falsehood or not, correct?
Yes.
Right.
Yes,
Because
yeah.
otherwise it might look as if you're suggesting that my suggestion is more dubious. Okay, I'm
it's
sure
not
we'll
your
check the
suggestion.
transcript later on. The second point is, just to be very clear, I thank you for the comments you made about facts and people's right to speak up and express their views. Indeed, that needs to be protected. And I think the whole purpose of the Select Committee is how best to enhance it, protect it, and protect it from DOFs, which are a different category with what we see, bots and whatnot. DOFs are in a separate category. And in fact, dealing with DOFs, the purpose of dealing with DOFs, one of the purposes is to really protect free speech and enhance free speech. So I wanted to assure you of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please, if you have comments.
Yes, yes. Thank you for the assurance, Minister. Because when we first started talking about this, we looked at how the term fake news has been bandied about, by politicians in other countries, by
In other countries.
in other countries and other power elites, etc. And also, then we were quite heartened when the Select Committee was convened to look at this issue, moving away from the unfortunately abused term of fake news to deliberate online falsehoods.
In fact, the Green Paper would make that clear too.
Correct. So through the Green Paper and also I think through today's hearing, it seems, at least to me and hopefully maybe to Shawn as well, that we are even more focused at the kind of DOF that we're looking at. So yeah, I think that's a good approach to take.
Thank you very much.
Okay, if there are no further questions, I would like to thank Dr. Soon and Mr. Goh for taking time to participate and contribute to the Select Committee's process. Within the next few days, we'll be sending you a transcript for today's proceedings. Now, please go through it carefully, and if you have any minor amendments, please make the changes and send the transcripts back to us. Okay. With that, thank you very much, Sergeant-at-Arms, which will accompany the witnesses out and bring in the next witness. Committee members, I think we'll have a very short lunch later on after the next witness.
Thank you for your time.